So between parents and children, you will hear different accents within the same house, under the same roof. And I have had readers telling me that when they were younger, they were ashamed of their parents' accents, of their parents' pronunciation. They were ashamed that their parents couldn't speak English well, or German well, or French well. But then as they grew older, they understood their parents better. So I am very much interested in the way in which we have this expectation as if there's one proper accent, there's one proper way of speaking English or French, any language. And anyone who doesn't speak it that way, well, there's something wrong with them. I think there's something wrong with this narrative. So let's talk about the word accent. The word comes to us from its Latin roots, accentus, meaning intonation or the intonation of singing. So from the very beginning, it's related to the way you speak, the way you pronounce. It's connected with pronunciation. And as an immigrant, as a writer who writes fiction in a second language, I am very interested in accents. I think oftentimes in our society, the world we're living in, accent can be a cause of embarrassment. It can even be a cause of shame or discomfort. I have observed so many immigrant families on both sides of the Atlantic experiencing this, especially the generational differences are important because the older generations, the ones who have migrated, let's say, to other countries, they have to work so hard. They don't have the time to improve their linguistic skills. Their children go to school from an early age onwards, and of course, they speak sometimes multiple languages so fluidly, but not the previous generation. So between parents and children, you will hear different accents within the same house, under the same roof. And I have had readers telling me that when they were younger, they were ashamed of their parents' accents, of their parents' pronunciation. They were ashamed that their parents couldn't speak English well, or German well, or French well. But then as they grew older, they understood their parents better. So I am very much interested in the way in which we have this expectation as if there's one proper accent, there's one proper way of speaking English or French, any language. And anyone who doesn't speak it that way, well, there's something wrong with them. I think there's something wrong with this narrative. This expectation is a huge pressure on so many immigrants, on so many people who are struggling every day to find a way to express themselves. But also, I think it is a lot of pressure on people coming from diverse backgrounds, minority communities, or people who come from different parts of the same country, because there are regional differences, dialects as well, or local dialects, regional dialects. So when we have this expectation that there's one proper way of writing in English, we're also, in a way, belittling or pushing aside so many people and their accents and their experiences. Just like we have different skin colors or hair colors, we have different accents as human beings. Why not accept it as, plural, as multiple? I think it all goes back to inequalities. Unfortunately, there's another barrier, if we're going to talk about accents, that we need to focus on, and that's a class barrier. So oftentimes, somebody's pronunciation can also be an indication of their class background, and the way they will be perceived will be completely different. We need to bear in mind that in the societies we're living in, there are major social and economic inequalities, even though private education is a very small percentage of all those children who are going to school. When you look at the number of people who make it to top universities in the UK, for instance, many of them, a big chunk of them actually, come from private education. And then when you look at the cultural elite or the political elite, again, many of them come from top universities. So there are all these inequalities that we need to be very much aware of, and we have to empower people who are disempowered. empowered. And I think it's very important that we welcome and embrace multiple pronunciations, multiple accents, and local dialects, rather than making people uncomfortable about the way they speak and about the way they express themselves. If I may add this, I think I'm also interested in this issue because I commute between languages a lot. And I think I feel attached to both English and Turkish in very different ways. Turkish for me is, I think, more emotional. It's the language of my grandmother. It's the language of my childhood, my upbringing. English for me is more cerebral, is more intellectual. I am an emotional person, and when I write in English, I feel perhaps a little bit of cognitive distance, which helps me to collect my thoughts. But my point is, we can associate different feelings with different languages. So, for instance, if my writing has melancholy or sadness or longing and sorrow, I find these things much easier to express in Turkish. But when it comes to humor, which I love and I adore, so when it comes to humor or irony or satire, I find these things much easier in English. You can be a bit more nomadic. You can keep commuting between languages. I have met immigrant families where the members of the family told me that when they're angry, they like to express their anger in this language, but when they're happy, they like to express their happiness in another language. And it's not something that you decide rationally. It just happens automatically. But my point is, let us welcome all accents, all pronunciations, all different ways of expressing ourselves, rather than looking for the proper way of speaking a language and imposing that from above, which makes many people uncomfortable and which creates a feeling of discomfort or alienation. I find it important that we create spaces in which we celebrate diversity, and the big part of that is dependent on the way in which we perceive language and our multiple accents.